Hey, advanced math. I'm going to embark on a big important new thing today, and that is solving variable equations. We created variable equations last time, where we looked at a situation and said, here's the first expression, here's the second, and those are equal. Today we're going to start talking about solving them. Ultimately, I'm going to end up showing you three strategies. Today's the first, and it's the most basic. It's just called common sense. So if you'll make this the title of the next free page in your math notebook, appreciate that. When you've done that, unpause, close up your notebook, and give me your full concentration. So reminder, we've been talking for a while about expressions, and then we're just transitioning into equations. Remember, an expression is something like, oh, this. There's no equal sign. There's just this. And when you look at an expression, the variable is unknown. That is some 4 times some unknown value, and we can't figure out what that is from an expression. An equation is two expressions that are equal to each other. So you might see, we're going to be seeing a lot of things like, say, this. That's an equation because it has an equal sign. You can see it almost has the word equal in it. So equations do have an equal sign, expressions don't. And you'll notice in here, you could figure out what the variable was. It's an unknown, but it's one we can figure out. In this case, 4 times what is 40? W would have to be 10. So that's a big difference too. In expressions, you can't figure out the value of the variable. In equations, you often can figure out the variable. And that's called solving it, or its solution, and that's what we're going to be working on today. So do a couple examples as I do. One where you just see the expression and figure out the variable, and we'll do a second where you have to make the equation and then figure out the variable from there. So 5 equals 40, if we're asked to solve this in a variable equation, solve means figure out the value of the variable. In an equation, that's what that means. So we're going to solve this. And that means figure out what the value of the variable is. And so our strategy today is just common sense. I'm not going to teach you any fancy steps, any fancy algorithm. I would just want you to know, like, a lot of the time you can just look at an equation and figure out what the value of the variable is. So in this case, this says 5 times something equals 30, and I can just figure out what the variable is. I know that 5 times 6 is 30, so I know that h has to be 6. I'm really doing nothing more than using common sense. So in this case, the solution to this equation is h equals 6. Because in an equation, you can figure out the value of the variable. So in the second one, we have to write the equation before we can solve it. And so let me remind you how we did that last time. So we said an equation is really two expressions that are equal to each other. So we're going to have an expression 1 and we're going to have expression 2 from the situation, and they're going to be equal to each other. So let's figure those out. So a board measures 15 meters in length. It's cut into two pieces. One piece measures 7 meters. What's the length of the other board? So important, I know you can probably, this is a very basic thing to figure out. And it is important to me that you take the time to write the equation the right way. I know you can just figure out the answer, but I want you to practice, because this one's so easy, but I want you to practice writing the two expressions, creating the equation, and then writing the answer, because I need you to be good at doing these steps when these aren't so easy to figure out, which they at some point won't be. So this one, rather than just saying, oh, well, duh, if one is 7, the other is 8, I know. I get it, and that's okay. I do still want you to practice writing the equation before you solve it. So in this case, expression number 1 might be the full board, which was 15 meters. I'm tempted to write an m like for meters, but remember that would look like a variable rather than a unit of measurement. So I'm not going to do that. Can I just undo? No. So I'm just going to write 15 and know that it's 15 meters. If I write the m, it's going to look too much like a variable. So expression number 1 is the full board. Expression number 2 might be the pieces. So it's cut into two pieces. One is 7 meters and the other is unknown. So I'll just do meters like that. So there's my equation. 15, the full board, equals the two pieces added together, 7 and m. Now, today we're just going to use, in order to solve that equation, we're just going to use the common sense strategy, which says, okay, well, I know 7 plus 8 is 15. So m equals 8 in this case. That's the solution. Again, I know you could have figured that out just right off the bat, but it takes a lot of practice to create these equations from what's given, and I really need you to have that practice because eventually these are going to get to where you can't just look at the problem and know it in your head, but we're starting with those. Okay, open up your math notebook and let's do 2 together. So same as last time, we're going to do a common one where you just see the equation and then one where we have to figure out the equation before we solve it. So go ahead and pause now, write these down, and unpause when you're ready to talk them through. Okay, so over here, again, we're just going to use common sense. We already have the equation, so all we have to do is solve it. And if you want to make a note in your notes, when you solve an equation, that means to find the unknown value. In an equation, when you're asked to solve it or find its solution, that means figure out what the variable equals. So in this, some unknown number plus 2 4/10 equals 12 4/10. I can use common sense to just know that that has to be 10 in this case. 10 plus 2 4/10 is 12 4/10. So that's the solution. And sometimes it's as simple as that, as just looking at it and using common sense to figure out what it is. In this second one, here, this one we have to write the equation. I guess I'll put this for your notes. Step 1 is going to be to write the equation. And I'm even going to write the equation for the situation. There's a difference between writing the situation and writing an equation just that gives you the answer. I want to write an equation for the situation. Use the information to write one for the situation, not just what would I multiply or divide or add or subtract to get the answer. I want to write one for the situation, then solve it. And again, that's real important to me because this is a skill you've got to have, being able to turn this into an equation before you solve it. Really, really important. I know it doesn't seem important because you can just figure out the answer to this, but trust me, once these get more complicated, writing the situation correctly is the only thing that's going to enable you to find the solution. So I want to really practice that. So Jackson's mom is 44, which is 4 times as old as Jackson. Write an equation that can be used to find his age. So again, I want to find one for the situation. Here's what I don't want to do is say, okay, I get it. Mom is 4 times as old as Jackson. So if I just do 44 divided by 4, I'll get Jackson's age. That's an equation for the answer. Like that's like, oh, I would just calculate 44 divided by 4 and get his age. That's an equation for the answer, which is not what I want to do. And I understand why you want to do that. But just trust me as we go. We've got to get good at writing equations for the situation. So this, remember, and to do that, we write our 2 expressions that are given to us. Expression 1 and expression 2. And set those equal to each other. Super, super, super important. So in this case, expression number 1 is probably going to be mom's age, because that's what I see first. So mom's age is 44. There's nothing to calculate. We know that one. Expression number 2 is also what we know about Jackson's age and how we relate it to mom's age. So we know that 4 times as old as Jackson. So if I take Jackson's age, I'll do J, and multiply it by 4, I get mom's age. So this is what we got out of the situation. 4 times J, 4 times however old Jackson is 44. Notice the difference between my equation here and my equation here. My equation here sells the situation that we were given. My equation at the top just says, here's how I quickly figure out Jackson's age. That's not what I want to do. I want you to write it out this way, and then you can just use common sense to figure it out. Okay, well, if something times 4 is 44, then I know that something is 11. So Jackson's 11, and that's my solution. So that's how you just use common sense to figure out the value of a variable. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I can just look at the situation, the numbers are pretty straightforward, and I can just say, okay, I know what j is, I know what g is, I know what x is, and figure it out. I am going to teach you 2 more strategies to do this because they're going to become important in the long term as common sense gets harder and harder, as these equations get harder and harder. But I do want you to always know, sometimes just say, hey, wait, let me just figure this out with common sense is always an option. If you feel like you have a handle on this strategy of using common sense to solve equations, you're all set. If not, I'm definitely going to recommend going back and reviewing part of this video so that you feel like you're in really good shape by the time you get to class. Thanks for your hard work, and I'll see you then.